The Buddha once said, "We are shaped by our thoughts, we become what we think." This profound statement captures the essence of the human experience, where the mind itself can be the greatest liberator, or the most formidable enemy. In the vast teachings of Buddhism, there exists a universal understanding that suffering arises not from the external world, but from the internal world, the mind. It is the nature of the untamed mind to create fear, anger, desire, and delusion, which in turn become the roots of suffering. This narrative seeks to explore how and why the mind is often our worst enemy, and how through the Buddhist path, one can turn the mind into a compassionate ally. The nature of the untamed mind. To understand why the mind is our own worst enemy, one must first grasp the nature of the untamed mind. In Buddhism, the mind is often compared to a wild elephant. Left unchecked, it can trample and destroy everything in its path. Thoughts of anger, jealousy, fear, and desire emerge like wild beasts, driving individuals into misery and conflict. This chaotic mind, filled with delusions, creates suffering in the form of anxiety, stress, hatred, and dissatisfaction. Consider the example of desire. The mind constantly craves more. More wealth, more love, more recognition. But when the object of desire is attained, the satisfaction is fleeting, and soon the mind craves something else. This cycle is endless and becomes the very source of suffering. When the mind does not get what it desires, it breeds anger, resentment, and despair. When it does get what it desires, it only breeds more desire or fear of loss. In either case, the mind keeps the individual trapped in suffering. Similarly, fear and anxiety are born from the mind's attachment to control. The mind creates scenarios of future calamities or past regrets, which do not exist in the present moment, but feel incredibly real. This is the mind working against itself, creating prisons of its own making. The illusion of self. One of the most profound teachings of the Buddha is the concept of anatta, or no self. The mind constructs an image of self, a fragile and often flawed identity that is deeply attached to reputation, possessions, relationships, and physical appearance. This constructed self is inherently vulnerable because it is based on impermanent things. For example, if a person ties their identity to their job and social status, the moment they lose either, their entire sense of self crumbles. Similarly, if one's identity is deeply attached to a romantic partner, the loss of that relationship results in unbearable suffering. The mind becomes its own enemy by clinging to a self that is destined to dissolve. The mind, in its ignorance, does not see the impermanence of all things. It clings, it attaches, and it fears, all of which guarantees suffering. The Buddha taught that understanding the illusory nature of the self is key to transforming the mind from an enemy to a liberator.